Hello, I've been given this image here, quite a nice Iceland image here, converted to black and white. And there's a couple of issues that we want to address here technically, and also some artistic things. There's a lot going on in this image, a lot of things to look at, which is good, but sometimes with impact images we want to target the eye into certain areas. That means tonally adjusting areas to focus on certain parts of the image and direct the eye with tone. So first of all, look at a technical issue. We've got some haloing, and this often happens if you're looking close with things like Photomatics or any HDR software, or sometimes if you over sharpen you get this haloing effect. Now when it's fixed, you can actually get quite a good fix, and this is the fixed layer, and there it is fixed. So you can see the difference there. But what I'll do is show you how I did that. So let's just delete that layer. So all I need is a copy of this layer. I can do that a number of ways. I can right click it and duplicate it, or Command J on the Mac. So we just call it background copy. So we've got a copy there of the layer. Now you notice there's no mask on this at this stage, but eventually we will mask in this fix. So the idea here, what's happening is there a white outline around the rock, and we really want just the clouds to be there. So we want the hard, let's just change the brush size. So we really want is this hard edge to meet the grey of the clouds, but this white edge here is causing an illusion of a halo. Well, it makes a halo. There's a number of ways you do it. Probably the quickest way is to blur all that area, but it's not real convincing. You could do a blur, Gaussian blur, which would fill that in. The grey would sort of blur into that, but then you've got some tough work with your painting, and it's not going to look completely realistic. So what I've found is the best solution quickly is the smudge tool. This under here is the smudge tool on this side here. What I do is set it as 100% and have it quite large. Just change the bracket key to make it bigger. And I'll just push that in like that. Now we're not worrying about the shape of the rock. We're just pushing in sort of what the sky would, where it would run in over the white highlight there. So we just go through that all the way around. Gone through and sped that up a bit, but we're just finishing off the smudging. You can see there I've gone right around the image and pushed that all in like that. So before and after, that's what we've done. We sort of contracted the whole thing. Obviously that's not the final product. What we want to do is now make the mask black. We want to just knock everything out, and we only want to paint in, what we only want to paint in is wherever it's white along that edge there, this edge, probably see my cursor here along that edge there. See where the white, that halo, we want to paint that in from the layer below. So it's got to come from this layer, sorry. That's the only bit we want to keep. So what that means is we need to have a black mask. If we put a black mask on here, so we click on a mask tool, the flag down here, click on that, now we Command I, or just invert that layer, make it black, and you can see it all comes back. So what in fact we've got a layer on top here, but the black knocks it all out. Okay, so that knocks it all out. So you can see there it's not doing anything. But now, if we zoom right in, I'll zoom into before it gets pixelated. Now on this black mask, not on the picture where we smudged, just here on the black mask, we need the opposite, which is white. A white paintbrush we're going to use. So we change to the brush tool, have it at 100%, flow 100. Brush size, pretty small, because we're going to go in quite close with the detail. And we're not painting, we're really only painting on, see where the highlights are. Now if we do go into here, we'll get some errors, and if we go into here we might get some errors. Like if we go into here, it's sort of going to paint the rock back in. And you can see, if I hold down Alt on the mask, you see what we're actually painting there. Now if I paint black on the mask, if I just switch my colours, that'll eradicate what we've done. So if I do that, we'll go back to where we started. So there is an escape route if you do go over the lines or whatever. So we go back to our white, and we just paint on basically where the halo is, because what it's actually doing is revealing that smudge, that cloud that we pushed in there. So we're doing that all around the whole image. I'll just pause that for a sec and do the rest of it. We've gone round with the white paint and we've masked that in all along that edge, and you can see before and after what that looks like. You can see that there, and it's, if we turn the mask off, you can do that by holding down shift. You can see how much that's contracted now. It doesn't look realistic, but if we put the mask back on, it's just, all the mask is doing is just that little edge there. And I've used mostly did it by hand, but you can use a Wacom tablet to be a bit more accurate. And as you go back, you won't see that halo as much. There we go. So the next part, what we wanted to do with this image is just look at the highlights. Some people say be careful your white blown out highlights. Now, you know, there could be colour in there. We can always see if there's colour in there by going to the info palette. So if we view under the windows, we turn on the info palette. Now wherever you put the mouse with a brush, and you change the info tool, which is this little eyedropper, it will tell you where you are on the picture, what pixel that is, I believe. Yes, so we need to click on the picture, not the mask. Notice that. If I did that, see, it's not showing any numbers up here, it's showing weird things. We've got to click on the actual picture. So if we want to see if there's colour, see, that's 256 up here. This is the colour in here, or the components of red, green, blue. So you're not really blowing out the highlights there. There's 256 is the top range, and the blacks are on 0 or C31. So if you've got any blacks like here, it's 51. So you really need to keep them, you know, the blacks at least 10 and the whites about 250. But so you've gone under a bit here, but we feel that on this image here we want to just drop the highlights back a bit. So what this layer, that does that. So you can notice the difference there. It's just pulling those highlights back so we can direct the attention elsewhere in the image and not have a bit of a leading line out there with the highlights. Light areas do tend to attract the eye and sort of pull you in there. So I'll just recreate that layer, and it's quite simple to do. So we'll just delete that layer. So I'm just using a curves layer, and the reason I'm using curves is I want to target that area specifically. Now the curve is a quite difficult tool to use, but this hand tool is really good for targeting. It can help you realize where on the curve a certain color exists. So if you move your mouse around, you'll notice that there's points on the curve change. So as soon as I click with the hand tool, that'll drop a point there. So we want that to be lighter, we want that to be lighter, you know, up to about there, maybe there. And there are all these points on the curve. If they're still in the diagonal position right along that line there, they're going to stay the same. You've got a couple of things that help you with this curve. This is dark to light. So what that means is if you drag on this curve and pull it down, now see what happens if you drag one point, you're going to sort of have to tweak them so that they come down like in a smooth curve. And sometimes you might have to add other points to anchor them. And the idea is here that we know that light areas are up this end, and particularly up right up the top here, the highlights. So we want to pull that curve down there, but we want to take it back to closer to the original there. So therefore you're not getting too much bleed into the other mid-tones and that. So this stays all the same because it's close to the middle curve, and then it just drops here. So you can see if I turn that on and off, what it's doing. It's just rocking them in a little bit. Now you don't want to be too harsh sometimes, and we can adjust the curve later to fix that. Okay, so at the moment you can see that's affecting the whole image, which isn't too bad, but look, I like some of these highlights here in the foreground. So we'll be knocking those out. Now there's two ways to approach this. Because it's a white mask, that's what you get with a by default with an adjustment layer. So we went down here and recreated layer with curves. That's an adjustment layer. So that's all white. Now what that means, we can paint on it with the opposite, with black. And what we do is paint the whole image. Because we only wanted the clouds to be changed, we'd paint everything else black. So we'd change the brush size to 90%. We'd paint everything black on here, except for that little area we want to keep. So that's one way of doing it. And it doesn't take too long, but that's one way of doing it. The other way, I'll just select all that layer and Alt delete. I'll just making it white again. So back to where we were. You don't have to do that. But if we go the other way and make it all black, it's not affecting anything. But if then we get a white paintbrush opposite to the mask colour, we paint in at say 50%, get a nice sort of furry brush. If we right click, we can see our hardness, that's our furriness of our brush, and we just drag it across, and you can see there it's just only targeting those areas. And see your stones aren't affected now, we're only just affecting the clouds. Now if I did make a mistake and did do the stones, I drop those highlights back here and I wanted to change that again, I can just switch back to black over here, 100%, just to get black like it originally was, and just paint back over that. And you can see what goes on over here on the side. Okay, so that's sort of all we want to do with that layer. Just fix that final bit up. It's not doing much, it's just darkening those areas there. If it's too severe, we can always change that there. Okay, so the next thing we want to, we're nearly finished, we really want to create a vignette of some sort, but there's a lot of areas to look. If you squint your eyes at this image, we can see there's a white cloud there. We really want to look at the rock, we want to look at the reflections in the rock, and the foreground is a bit of interest there. So we can direct the viewer there by making most things dark and low contrast, and just have this exposure for the main areas of content that we want the viewer to look at. So that's what this layer is here. It's an exposure layer, and you can see what it does. So it darkens down quite dramatically the whole image, but leaves in the original exposure that we've got underneath on that area there. Okay, so we'll already create this layer there. So we'll delete that one. So we've got 3 layers at the moment. So we could do it with curves. We just do exposure just for variation, but it's also a good one to learn. It's quite quick and easy. So it's under here, it's an adjustment layer, exposure. Now I used to use the top and the bottom curves. I always leave offset in the middle, so that's going to light darken, that's going to lighten. You can see it sort of does everything quite dramatically, but this one, the gamma sort of does everything more evenly. So this is more dramatic in the darks and lights, makes more contrast, but this one sort of evens things out a bit. So we go to about there. We're just sort of looking at it now and saying, oh, I still want to keep detail in the blacks. I don't want them completely knocked out, because a lot of this will stay the same, but we're just looking at the dark areas here. How dark do we want them? And I feel that, in the cloud there's enough detail there. But okay, so that's what we got here. So everything's black, but we want to bring light back in. We want to bring the light from the original exposure. If we turn that on and off, we can see there's the original exposure there. Now it works really good on the rocks and on the island out there, and the water leading up to it. So what we'll do is this time we'll grab a black paintbrush. So we've got the brush tool, we've got black. If you always want your default colors, you click on here, and then we want black. You can switch the foreground to background with this little arrow here. So that's the black there. Now we've got black there. We want normal mode, and we'll drop this opacity down to something like a third, so down to 30% or something like that. So we want to slowly build this up. Now it's a big brush, it's furry. That would be a furry edge, that would be a hard edge. You can always click on these. See, these are all your furry brushes here, and these are the different sizes. The number is 45, you can see it up there. So you can see it's quite small. You can always just adjust it there, or use your bracket keys. But we want it quite large, somewhere like that. So we're going to dab, and you can see what it's already doing. We're going to dab on here, and just bring the light back in. You can see over here what's happening. It's a fuzzy brush. If you hold down Alt, click on that, you can see what we're painting in. So it's gradual. So we're directing the eye where we want to look. So it's good to look along the foreshore there, up along the outskirts of that reflection, creeps into that triangle there. So just in there quite nicely. You can always stop at this stage and turn it on and off and see what you've done. And you can go a bit further, but you can't go any further than once it gets black, so holding down Alt, it's about as far as you can go. Now if you do find that you want to go further, you can always double click on the adjustment and you can go further by going that far. But again, it's a bit too radical, so somewhere around there is nice. And you can see before and after. So you notice the difference in these masks. These were created the same way, but one was done black, painted back in white. It was just a shortcut. This one, because we only had a bit to block out from the layer below, it's quicker to paint on. Sorry, let that through. So the final bit here, we just wanted to add a little contrast, micro contrast, or a bit more kick in those rocks, a bit more kick in the details. I've done this with a curve, and it's a targeted curve to the tonal range of the rocks and some of the highlights. It's more targeted. The mask is a lot more delicate, and it's on the top, so it's more targeted. I generally fixing things down the bottom, then more global adjustments, and then go to the detail. Okay, so how was this one created? Well, it's quite simple. Again, it's a curve layer, so we'll just delete that. You can see now, if we look at the rock, just to do with a bit more form in it, a bit more detail, and there's, get some more contrast. The mid-tones in there get a bit more contrast. So you can do it with a number of different layers, but I like to use curves, and it's good practice to do that because it's the most versatile. Now again, the hand tool. Now again, the same principle. We'll hover over the areas we want to kick in, and we want to make it a bit more brighter, a bit more contrasty, so it'll be a steeper curve. So we'll click a point down here. That's sort of the darkest area, and the highlights are sort of up around about here. Now you can see we basically want to go up with this one and down with that one to steepen in between those two. But what that does is puts the rest of the curve off the diagonal line. So what you have to do is just click and add an extra points to just bring it back. And you don't have to be completely accurate, and you want to be smooth. You don't want to have things like this happening that posterize. So just sort of try to be smooth and gradual, and the same here. So it's just sort of going down like that. So just sort of somewhere around there. Alright. So you can see what that does. It does kick in a lot around here. If you're looking closely here, it's bringing out a lot of detail in here. Probably too much at this stage, but we can also soften that. Now this is one of those changes that we could paint all black because we've got a white mask now. We can paint black everywhere else and just leave these bits here, because white again reveals the change that you're making on that layer. So it's going to be quicker for us to paint it all black, so invert it and then just paint on with white on the areas we want to affect. So I'm getting a brush. Now it's going to be a smaller brush this time, and the opacity is good. We're just going to change the size of the brush. We can right click and pull that down a bit, maybe a bit smaller. Cool. So as soon as we paint on here, normal mode, white, we start to reveal underneath. You can see it coming through there. Now I'm sort of painting on the veins, like middle. I'm not going to paint on the edge too much. I'm just sort of painting on the form. So you got to think of it as a 3D object, sort of where the light's coming from. So we're sort of making out that there's a bit more light on the object in sort of the middle of the scene, which has probably been lost. So we're just bringing that back a bit. Doesn't might look too much, but just click turning it on and off, you can see it coming back. Always scroll out a bit, and you can see those details just coming in. Now you'll notice here, you could actually, if you turn off the mask, and again we hold down Shift, there might be some details in the mid-tones here. You might bring around, see this rock here, it's quite nice when you turn that off. There's some details in here. So it doesn't hurt to just experiment painting a bit of here, just see if some of these can be brought out or not. But again, you're sort of targeting the middle tones here and making them more contrasty. The other thing you could do is just sort of look at the water here, and we can sort of bring in a little bit of a highlight here, just to bring that up a bit. Just through there maybe, just to give that line a bit more. If you don't like that, you can always undo or paint on with black. Again, change the colours with the X key and paint on with black. Alright, so I'm quite happy with that. Yeah, so we've sort of finished that image there. We've just kicked in some highlights. We've targeted the eyes. Let's just go through it again. But the background here, we had to fix this, the haloing. So we've smudged that in and then masked it with this mask here. Then we've darkened the clouds there. You can see here the clouds here. So we targeted this curve to the end, the highlights. If you use the hand tool, there's the highlights there. We've dropped them down to make them darker, and then we've made it all black and just painted in where we want it, because it was a quicker shortcut than going the other way with white mask and painting black paint. Okay, this one here, well, this was a global sort of change. We wanted everything a bit darker. It's like a vignette, but again, we just wanted to not darken that area there. Now probably it's a bit dramatic. Maybe I can do a global adjustment and just turn that one, the lay opacity, down a bit if I didn't want it. It still retains the mask and all those settings in there. It just softens the impact. And last we saw in here, we wanted to add a little bit of detail, quite a finishing touch. We wanted to add a bit more contrast in there. So that curve there was targeting that area there. Just go back to what the exposure layer was doing. It's just dropping the exposure negative and the gamma up. Alright, so that's how I wanted to finish that one. Quite an interesting exercise, brings in a few different disciplines, but I hope that is explained quite well.